So part of this China-Africa story where the Maghreb fits is, of course, the anti-colonial support of China, and it's the socialist friendship that it has developed with African countries during the Mao era. We can trace China-Maghreb relations mostly to the Bandung Conference, to that Bandung Conference of 1955, which is where a lot of these initial diplomatic relations between China and the rest of African countries were sparked. So China-Maghreb relations can, in no different from China-Africa relations, can be traced, at least in this contemporary sense, right, to the Bandung Conference in 1955. So in this regard, again, the Maghreb is no exception. So China recognized Algeria's provisional government 4 years before the country's official independence from French colonial rule in 1962. Today, Algeria celebrates 60 years anniversary of its independence. So to our participants from Algeria, we share your congratulations message on this occasion. But China also established diplomatic relations with Morocco and Mauritania soon after their independence. So such practices of solidarity still figure prominently in the discourse of China, Algeria, and China-Maghreb relations in the speeches of the government officials. So forth. So beyond these historical relations, and when we fast forward to more recent times, China has become the largest trade-in partner of Maghreb countries in the last few years. It has actually surpassed European countries in the total trade volumes with Maghreb countries. But the issue here, it remains the case that Maghreb countries face acute trade deficit problems with China, as they import far more from China than they export to it, especially even including when accounting for energy exports. So, for instance, Morocco's exports to China in 2017 reached $760 million US. Its imports from China in the same year were over 3 billion, so 3.3 billion US dollars. So beside trade, so this is just to give you an example, but the same trade deficit can be observed in Algeria and Tunisia as well. So it is an issue, it is a problem. So whereas China at the same time is growing as a major partner of these countries, but it also is the case that the trade deficit is not improving. So besides trade, the main other areas of cooperation between China and the countries of the Maghreb include the energy sector, infrastructure, port, shipping infrastructure or construction, tourism, financial cooperation, and increasingly as well the IT sector. Several colleagues have written about the China's IT sector in North Africa, including Hinan Al-Qadi. So in terms of infrastructure, local authorities in Maghreb states, the efficiency and timeliness of Chinese enterprises in turning over projects. So Algeria benefited from the strong appreciation of hydrocarbon prices towards the end of the 2000s, which permitted government-planned financing for the construction of close to 4 million lodging units. And for this enormous amount of lodging units to actually to materialize in the Algerian government had contracted a lot of these constructions to the China State Construction and Engineering Corporation, the CSCEC. And the company, the China State Construction and Engineering Corporation, enjoyed such a high kind of reputation in Algeria for completing the projects on time, sort of the efficiency and the timeliness, that it actually had constructed several other really main infrastructure projects in the country, including a shopping mall in Algiers, hospitals in Oran, hotel in Algiers, as well as the Grand Mosque of Algiers, which was inaugurated not long ago. And so it has this reputation for efficiency and timeliness has really given the edge to Chinese construction companies to come in with these projects. So whereas hydrocarbon prices were at the core of China-Algeria infrastructure Corporation, Algeria was not exporting more than a marginal portion of its petroleum to China, so amounting actually to less than 2% of China's imports. And so in terms of hydrocarbon or infrastructure investments and exchanges, energy exchanges, actually Libya was the highest petroleum exporting member to China in the region with about 10% of its production. However, as we know, since 2011 and the conflict in Libya, China's strategy or China's energy share in the Maghreb actually dwindled significantly, and the European Union remains the biggest destination of North African hydrocarbon exports, Algeria and Libya included, as well as Mauritania. But we have to also recognize that in terms of energy relations, petroleum is not the only, the be-all, end-all kind of relationship with China. Their iron ore and other minerals are also important, and they also play an important role in China-Maghreb relations. So the overwhelming majority of Mauritania's exports to China are constituted of iron ore. However, same way with Algeria's petroleum, Mauritania's iron ore did not make up more than 1% of China's global imports, even though the majority of its iron goes to China globally in terms of China's consumption of iron ore. It's just 1%. So between 2005 and 2019, the value of China's investments and contracts in the Maghreb actually increased from $600 million US dollars to $29.6 billion US dollars. So these investments the leap, the increase is quite significant. But despite such spike in the total amount, actually China's investments, foreign direct investments in North Africa still did not surpass a meager, guess it, 0.2% of China's investment stock abroad. So it's not even 1% of China's stock abroad. So it's more important for Maghreb countries that China invests in them than it is for China that Maghreb countries have such investments. It is kind of in talk of these numbers, this is what that really means. So 0.2% is very meager. It's very little. So to a lesser significant degree, these areas of cooperation are also growing in China-Maghreb relations. There are others. So for instance, tourism industry, I mean, especially before the pandemic, and everybody is just very eager to see what kind of comes, what will happen to such tourism deals, after the pandemic and once kind of things get back to somewhat post-pandemic rhythm. So especially with in terms of Maghreb countries, lots of them have been trying to attract more Chinese tourists. So Morocco especially has been successful at this, with lots of deals as to figuring out a better way to deal with issuing visas for Chinese tourists, and also Royal Air Maroc issuing direct flights as well between Morocco and and China. So these were some of the kind of initiatives that we started seeing at towards the end of 2019. So hopefully things will get back to sort of this rhythm of trying to expand these cooperation. So the security military sector is another one, with Algeria and Tunisia actually increasingly or opening up their markets to Chinese drones, Chinese-made drones or China-made drones, and other military equipment. So, I mean, despite the two countries, Algeria and Tunisia, still being bigger clients of Russia, especially for Algeria and France for Tunisia, in the last decade, we have actually seen growing cooperation with China on the security front. In May 2019, Tunisia and China announced plans for security sector cooperation with pledges from Beijing to provide trainings for the Tunisian army. Similarly, in early 2022, Algeria purchased combat drones from China, and so on and so forth. So this is just as to sort of give an overview, right, of the areas of cooperation. In terms of means of influence, just very quickly talk about the BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a major tool and platform for China's foreign policy making in the global south, in Africa, and also in the Maghreb included. So given the maritime potential that all 5 countries of the Maghreb open up in terms of trade and shipping routes to Europe, as well as across the Atlantic, and as well as sort of trying to be that kind of portal bridge between kind of northern Mediterranean, Southern Mediterranean, the rest of the continent, and also on both sides. So Maghreb countries actually do have this hugely strategic geolocation in terms of interest to the Belt and Road Initiative. But in reality, Morocco has actually become the first country in the region to sign on to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and this followed a visit by King Mohammed VI to China in 2016. So this was kind of an early on signing on to the Belt and Road Initiative, especially for North African countries or Maghreb countries. So the visit paved the way for Morocco to join BRI in early 2017, and a number of important deals and agreements were signed between the 2 countries. For example, the building of Cité Mohammed VI Tangier Tech, which is a $10 billion industrial city in Tangiers, which is expected to attract 200 Chinese companies, create 100,000 jobs in textile, machinery, car manufacturing, other opportunities for capacity building, and so on and so forth. The Tangiers Tech City plan or initiative has stalled a little bit for several issues and problems, but it still is an important deal that needs to be mentioned. Morocco also has a very good strategic way of kind of strategically placing itself as a country that can have that geographic edge in terms of shipping routes, in terms of shipping capabilities, and having its ports be strategically attractive to the BRI because of that ability to kind of market the cross and the Atlantic and the Mediterranean and so on and so forth. For Algeria, Tunisia have also signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. For Algeria, so far, the Belt and Road Initiative has just been kind of a symbolic gesture. So we have not necessarily seen enormous amounts of investments, or the potential is huge, but it just has not yet been materialized. And so it has been more or less a symbolic kind of relationship than more of a concrete initiative. So I want to move on quickly to the challenges. In terms of challenges for Beijing's Maghreb ambitions, we can divide these to 2 main points. Some of the challenges of China-Maghreb relations are actually external to China-Maghreb stories, and the other ones are internal. So I'll start first with the external ones. In terms of these external challenges, 2 are important. So first, the competition from EU partners is steeper for China and Chinese interests in the Maghreb than they are for the rest of the African continent. So Maghreb countries receive frequent and significant investments from foreign direct investments from European countries. And so it's a little bit more difficult for China to outpace European partners in the Maghreb than it is in the rest of the continent. A lot of this has to do with history. Some of it has to do with the fact that many of these countries are middle-income economies. They're not, so they already attract a fair amount of FDI, of foreign direct. So it's a little bit difficult to outpace that for China and to enter the market as a later mover, as a later developer, or kind of a rising power, whatever you want to call it. So, but also besides the EU partners, Gulf countries invest quite a bit in the Maghreb as well. And Gulf countries, because of cultural relations, historic relations, all that stuff, they also present a big competition for China. So the competition in the Maghreb is a bit steeper for Chinese companies than it would be in other places where maybe, this amount of FDI is not that prevalent. So what this means for China is that, its credit lines and investments are not as effective in the Maghreb with the existing competition as they would be in other countries that lack investment competition from other actors. So fundamentally, Chinese investments offers, they have to be more attractive in the Maghreb than they do in other regions of the continent, and they end up being a little bit less, indispensable in the Maghreb in this way. Relatedly, China is a relatively late comer, as I mentioned, in the Maghrebi market, especially when it comes to energy. but also investments and trade. So compared to China's advantage in the rest of the continent, in the Maghreb, maybe the story is a little bit different, where Chinese companies have had a difficult time integrating the market and overly kind of, Europeanized trade-in systems and investment systems that we see in the Maghreb. So in Tunisia, for example, Beijing has signed MOUs for several projects aimed at diversifying the relationship. But at the end of the day, these projects have had a very hard time seeing the light and investment, the light of day, and the investments actually stalled. So this isn't the only case in Tunisia. Earlier, I talked about the Tangiers tech city, and as well as other investments that we saw in Algeria. That there's just no follow-up. So these are external challenges that are important to note. Internally, to the story of China-Maghreb relations, we can also think about two distinct or maybe related issues. So one, there's an issue of perception and trust in the brand. So an interesting puzzle about how China is perceived in the Maghreb and to some extent in the continent more generally, is that there is a discrepancy, and Kobus actually has talked about this in several pieces that he wrote and podcast episodes with Eric, where there is a discrepancy that we see between street level and government level perceptions with China, and suffering an image deficit among the population. The Maghreb societies compared to the official discourse level. So this is something that Kobus has mentioned in China-Africa relations in general, and I agree that we do see this as well in China-Maghreb relations. There is this deficit between how strong the government-to-government relations are and how the populations at the level of society kind of perceive China-Maghreb relations or China individual. So indeed, according to the Arab Barometer findings from last survey, which were done in summer 2020, so this is 2 years ago, only 36% of surveyed Algerians prefer to have stronger relations with China, putting Algeria in second to last position. So this is abysmal, right? So it's very, very kind of a poor, perception ranking there. Additionally, and in the same survey, we can talk about surveys later. Let me talk about the second challenge, which is part of this challenge that's internal to China-Maghreb relations. And I'll end on this note. So lack of understanding, actually limited knowledge of the region. So there's lack of understanding of the political landscape, right? Especially in light of regime transitions associated with the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, or associated with other uprisings at Hirak in Algeria, for instance, have actually proved to come with a costly price for Chinese enterprises. We saw the same thing in Libya in 2011, of course, where Beijing had to maneuver an emergency extraction operation for about 30,000 Chinese workers from the country. So the fundamental lack of deep understanding of the history and politics and political culture of the region actually presents a serious challenge for Beijing's BRI investments and projects in the region. So you see every now and then, especially when Hirak started, there were all these questions from Chinese companies: should we go ahead with this deal? Should we hold on? Should we wait? There was basically a lot of not understanding really how to interpret what was going on. Language and cultural barriers still impede the development of Maghreb-China relations as well. Cultural exchanges are still sparse between China and Maghreb countries compared to those especially that China has with other African countries. So China has had very few Confucius institutes in the Maghreb compared to how many there are. Actually, there are probably more Confucius institutes in, let's say, Kenya than there are in Maghreb countries together. And don't quote me on that. I think it's just, kind of my perception, but there's still no Confucius institutes in Algeria, for instance. So this kind of shows a little bit of a gap in terms of cultural relations there. So, to conclude, despite all the challenges that I kind of just outlined, China remains an attractive partner to Maghreb countries because it presents a viable cooperation alternative to the traditional structures that these countries have with European states. Like many African countries, governments in the Maghreb have leveraged their ties to China as a bargaining tactic as well when dealing with European countries and sometimes dealing with the US as well. China's investments in the Maghreb remain modest, even if Algeria accounts for a big portion of China's foreign direct investment in the entire African continent. In overall numbers, it still is a weak amount, as China's FDI is much stronger in Asia and other places than it is in Africa. In addition, Maghreb countries tend to use China's interests in the region to their advantage to strike more lucrative investment deals, but they are challenged by the fact that they do not have a China policy. They don't have, and sort of also, to be honest, especially in this group knows best, kind of the escalating rivalries that countries of the Maghreb region have internally to them is actually working against the possibility of unifying kind of policy for dealing with China and other partners on the matter. So thank you so much.